Om Bhadram Kanebhihi Shrunyama Deva Bhadram Pashyema Kasabhir Yajadraha Stire Angis Stutu Vamshas Tanubhihi Vyasema Deva Hitam Yadya Ayuhu. May that one, in the form of all the deities, all the illuminating factors, bring what is auspicious with our ears. That one that is worthy of worship, may we see with our very eyes what is auspicious. May we enjoy the life allotted to us by all the various graces, offering praise to them with our bodies strong of limb. Last week we picked up the subject of the Prasna Upanishad that asks 6 questions. And this peace invocation is the start, actually, starting with Bhadram Kanebhihi, of the peace prayer of the Prasna Upanishad. Many, many interesting and beautiful things are brought about through this Prasna Upanishad because it comes from the Tharava Veda. And in the Tharava Veda, we also find the Mandukya Upanishad and the Mundaka Upanishad. The Prasna Upanishad will therefore answer many, many questions connected with that. Last week, we dealt with basically the first question in a relatively brief period of time, so I want to review what that is. Firstly, for any student to study, several requisites are there. Self-control and discipline is there. And that is why we approach a teacher. We have to approach that teacher also with not only self-control, but also faith. Faith in what? Basically, faith in the scriptures and faith in the teacher also. And so with this, some students whose families had already studied some element of the issue or the subject of Brahman, Brahman being the objective that is to be studied and found out. But 2 Brahmans are laid out for us in these scriptures. The one we might characterize essentially as Brahma Paraha. Brahma Paraha is the inferior kind of Brahman, and we mistake this inferior Brahman with the superior Brahman. Brahman indicates that there must be some kind of source. And today we can easily say that matter is the source of everything. Or we can say that energy is the source of everything. From the last century onwards, we were able to confirm what the yogis already knew, that matter or mass and energy are the same thing. This was brought out in 1905 by Einstein. Already Swami Vivekananda was asking his friend Nikola Tesla if there any evidence for force being equivalent to matter, and was there some kind of equation that could verify this, and so that we can now endorse the validity of our method and our philosophy in a scientific way. Science itself will endorse it. Now the question of energy and the whole subject of energy and the term energy was only used in the last century. Prior to that, in Vivekananda's time, no term was like that was there. It was there in the ancient Indian texts. It was termed variously, but a popular term is prana, energy. And so Einstein takes this term and he puts energy as E and puts it as E equals M. But the problem is this: what kind of energy is it? What energy does? That's long been known, of course, by us. But what it is, that is unknown by modern science. And that's a good question. What is it that we call energy? Why is it conserved? Why does it follow conservation laws? No matter what you do to it, You don't get anything new out. You just get a transformation of energy from one form to the other. So the energy can be seen as gravitational energy. What happens when stars form? Gases are condensed, hydrogen is squeezed. A gravitational energy is transformed into kinetic energy. That's transformed into radiational energy, where suns shine, stars shine. And then ultimately that comes into some kind of fluid form and wave form and solid form and all the rest of it that we know of. All these forces were known, other than nuclear and weak forces identified now in this more modern era. And yet everything else, really, the big important players were already identified. So this question of energy is raised. It is raised in this second question that is put in the Prasna Upanishad. When we say that energy is equivalent to mass, the confusion comes in modern science when you add a c squared. But the c squared really is only to make various units conform. We have the c squared, but that was only there to square off the physics department. We already had a unit of energy called the erg, and we already had a unit for mass called a gram. And we had to know how many ergs make a gram. That's not appropriate when you deal with the whole cosmos. And so what that c squared in the equation means is that something like 900 billion ergs makes 1 gram. That's all it means. So everything can be reduced to energy. This is just a reiteration and an echo of what was previously known, that everything can be resolved into energy. Now, where does that energy itself come from? And then how does it apply to us in man? And what is the relationship between universal energy and the energy that is felt by yourself to enable you to walk and talk, to listen, to think? All of this is various forms of energy. And so we can only find these things out when we approach a competent teacher. And so these students approach the teacher, and the teacher, being a wise person, being accepted, Pipalada was his name, being accepted that he was a wise person, his wisdom is shown in his answer also. So he said that after 1 year you can pose all these questions, having reshuffled all your ideas and gotten some clues, but above all, having exercised self-control and faith. Having done all of that, you can then ask the question, and I won't answer you necessarily, only if I know the answer to your questions. So he answers in an extremely humble way. So the text goes, first question is, where are all these beings born from? Where did they all come from? That's a very fundamental question. Never mind about energy, let's deal with that later, but let's deal with what we know, what we see in the observable universe, and take it from there. When we look around, we see all kinds of variations. And we seem to be separate from it. And we have to form a relationship with all those other entities. And often, forming that relationship gives us a great deal of problems, gives us an element of pain. Our reaction to the world is guaranteed, at some point or other, to give us an awkward situation, a painful situation, that facilitates a further and deeper inquiry. So it's to our advantage. Pain is to our advantage, actually. And so the Lord of all creatures became desirous of progeny is the answer. What does that mean? To desire progeny? Was there a gap? Was there an absence of something? It's put in human terms. So desiring progeny, that is, having become desirous of creating progeny for himself, being filled with the idea, I shall create by becoming the soul of all. The wonderful statement. By becoming the soul of all, that is Prajapati, the Lord of creatures, having practiced meditation, having done some kind of tapasya, as it's thought of, that entity then, from that effort, if you will, from that all creatures came. Now elsewhere we call this Hiranyagarbha, the womb of all beings. But in more contemporary language, we can call it a cosmic mind. Just as there is a human mind with a human body and limbs, so we can think maybe in the whole universe, is there something like that? Can we see the entire universe as a Purusha, as a person? In which case, there would be limbs, there would be tips of fingers, there would be something like that, there would be eyes, there would be skin, not in the literal biological sense, but there would be a microcosmic equivalence. So too, where did all this come from? A mind. How do we come to such a conclusion? Because mind is what comes out at the end. We are now using the mind in order to discuss and evaluate these concepts, to try and to understand something deep, to make an inquiry with a view to a certain practice that leads us to a discovery. So in making that statement alone, a number of axioms are given. Firstly, we realize that we are more than what we assume we are. This is why there's an urge to go forward and forward, to continue our discovery. And man has an urge to discover many things. There was some years ago an incident where about 13 people died on Mount Everest, very large toll in one go, because of the unpredictability of the mountain, going through a certain area on the trek to the top of Everest. You have to make various base camps. It's a wonderful analogy for our own spiritual life. So people take an adventurous spirit, but they are helped on the way. The local Nepalese people, called the Sherpas, have become specialists in their hardy acclimatization to the altitude, and they're prepared to carry, while everybody else, all the tourists and so on who want to do this climb, are all comfortably sleeping in tent hotel quarters. All their equipment is being carried forward to another base camp. And that means that a very precipitous field has to be traveled through. A whole series of ice that can fall at any time. An avalanche can occur at any moment. It's a very, very dangerous operation, but the Sherpas will do it some 20 times in the night. And on this one occasion, of course, this avalanche came, broke all the ladders that are carrying them across crevices. And 13 perished in one go and created an enormous controversy. So we are prepared to risk our own lives in order to discover and have the thrill of climbing and standing on top of the highest mountain in the world and viewing things from that point of view. And then coming and telling everybody, yes, I did it. A kind of sense of human accomplishment. People are prepared to explore the depths of the ocean as well. There is still on this planet unexplored territory that nobody has been to. Very rare, but nonetheless, it is still there. And we have the urge to go and do it. Our urge for discovery is deeply embedded in us. But right here in our local station, we find the mind. And all of this is to explore the outer world. What about the inner world? What about the depths of the mind itself? What about entering into the very depths of your own being and the depths of your own soul? That inquiry has to be taken. So we do a journey, as we do from any other point of view, like climbing Mount Everest, we make base camps. In the primary base camps, the thing that is nearest to us is human body itself. And then we see all these other things that also have bodies, all kinds of creatures, And we will naturally wonder, where did these all come from? You can't take things at face value. There must be an origin somewhere, a source somewhere. So it's taken for granted such a thing is there. Such a thing has to exist. That's the first axiom. There must be a source for everything. And then the second thing that is taken for granted is that if we go and explore this source, we have the capacity to find it. And it is not what we find on the outside necessarily. So all of the Upanishads are endeavoring to lead us step by step on this inward journey, not just to lay out principles, simply abstract things, but to lead us by the hand through these principles step by step. Of course, it requires not only the scripture that is there, but it requires a teacher. The scripture itself is from teachers, but who understands it? So that is the answer. But of course, ahead of it, this beautiful statement. So live here again for a year, he tells his students, the teacher, and then he says, and with brahmacharya, with continence, with strict self-control, with a disciplined life, and with utmost faith, with deep trust, deep unwavering conviction, not only in the source, in the methods, but also in the guidance and in the destination and the exploration itself. And if we know, we shall explain all your questions, says the teacher. A wonderful statement of humility. So, the eternal will have to be realized. Yashaha ha vai tat sarvam vakshati. This one will tell us everything. With that approach, they come to this teacher. So what are things born? And we have a list. And I'll summarize what we went through last week. First of all, Pipalada tells them there is an entity called Prajapati. What is Prajapati? Lord of all creatures, literally. So is laying out something and trying to give people the understanding that the source is there that has within it a potentiality to unfold. And how does it do it? By deliberation. What is called tapaha, no doubt. But this is a direction of the will. By will and skill, something happens. Some movement takes place. Now, any movement requires energy. So what is the first expression of this energy? Two things. Energy comes on the one side and matter comes on the other. And so it's very clear that this comes as a bifurcation of these two things, one acting on the other. But the matter is not described as you would describe it in terms of modern scientific terms. A peculiar expression is used for it. That it is rai, it is food. And then it gives us a whole picture that energy is the consumer of it, the producer of it and the consumer of it. So endorsing the modern scientific understanding of energy, of conservation of energy. Things get eaten, there is always an eater, and there's always a product, and it goes on and on and on. But as it goes on, more complexity takes place. So this polar arrangement is there, food on the one side, energy on the other side. And then that is also illustrated by two other sets of dualities, sun and moon. The sun on one side, the moon on the other, sun representing energy. We can easily understand that. All of our energy is solar energy. We have no energy of our own. They're a life-giving entity. And on the other side, we can see that the moon is something solid. We can stand on it. We can't stand on the sun. We can stand on it. We can walk on it. We can drive things on it. It has been explored. Much of it is silica, where it shines, especially where these great meteors would have struck the surface and pockmarked its face, and where a great large explosion took place as a result, what it did, it sent up silica. Silica, as we know, is glass, and glass shines, and that remains on the surface. Why does the moon shine so brilliantly in certain places? Because it's made from glass. So that's another image. But further, a question arises about the course of life itself, and that too you can use this analogy that the year itself is this Prajapati, this Lord of creatures, presenting itself as the year, as time, solar time. And then there's a pathway. One pathway leads to the realm of the moon, one pathway leads to the realm of the sun. This analogy is used, the course of life after death. The month itself is deemed to be this Lord giving us the opportunity to determine our own path, whether we will go on the one less dedicated path toward the moon, or the other one, which is a more dedicated, more concentrated path toward the sun. And then the bright fortnight is issued and the dark fortnight is issued. And so for this reason, the bright fortnight associated with the sun, all the great ceremonies and rituals and so on are done, that is, movements of intention are done in those periods of time. And then eventually the food is the Lord and the seed that comes from it. So let us see. From this will, this movement, will come energy and matter. And from energy and matter will come literally food. And from food comes the seed for creatures. And from the seed, of course, comes creatures. So the eater is the Lord, and the Lord in this body, what is that? This is the next question. Tantamount to, what is this eater in this body? So in this body, we also have this duality. Matter that is made from food. This body is made from food. But there has to be energy, and the food itself generates energy, going in an eternal cycle. So let's explore this question then. Second question will go something like this then. Okay. So second question comes here. But I think we started off reading out the second question here. Ata hainam bhargavo vedarbhihi praprachaha Bhagavan katyeva devaha pracham. Devaha, these are really beautiful technical terms which are often misunderstood, so require a great deal of explanation. So it begins anyway like that. So essentially, another student, Bhargava, from the Vidarbha country, these names are put so that we can understand this is a real conversation. It is not just inserted mythical names. So let us explore what this real question is. How many powers support the created world? This is sub-question 1. How many illumine this? Sub-question 2. And who again among them is the greatest? And the answer comes, either truly is such a power, wind, fire, water, earth, speech, mind, eye, and ear too, they having illuminated declare, we sustain and support this body. In other words, if you ask this question not to a teacher, but personalizing these various aspects in the body, illuminating factors. The eyes illuminate things. The ears give us extra information and knowledge about the external world. So too the skin. So all of these, if they were to speak independently as governing entities in a city, which is called the human body, a beautiful image portrayed in the Katha Upanishad of an 11-gated city, with all these illuminating and sustaining factors. If you ask them, so who is the governing factor amongst you? Who are you? they would have to, supposing they egoistically claim, yes, me, I'm superior, I'm superior, I'm superior, then if the real superior entity, the Lord of them, suddenly gets up and say, very good, please carry on, and leaves, because there has to be some central source, then all the others should leave with it. And so it is in this story. And so it goes on like this. So prana will be shown to be the chief. That is energy. Now we can easily see that, because when this energy departs, we declare this person is physically dead. So the question comes like this, or the answer comes like this. Space is put like that. Yeah. Now when we say space, actually the term is really prana, is life. So it says, space in fact is this deity, as also air, fire, water, earth, the organ of speech, mind, and eye and ear. That is, if you go through all the 5 elements that we know of in their subtle form, and it gets expressed in their gross form, the things that the sense organs respond to are being mentioned. So the first thing is space or ether, what is called akasha, primordial matter. Matter and space are deemed in this science to be one and the same thing. And I think modern science will begin to verify this. When we say that space is expanding and ask what is expanding into what, we have misunderstood. Space alone was there, matter alone was there, and it is simply growing. Our idea of space is a spatial idea that it must relate to objects with a certain dimension. But space is this deity. There's much confusion about Hinduism. Last week, I gave a small talk to a group of people, non-Hindu people, at their request. Is trying to give them some universal comfort and understanding in this era of this pandemic. And one of the greatest misunderstandings about so-called Hinduism is a polytheistic religion. You have so many gods. Even amongst Hindus, that's the same misconception. How many gods are there? Oh, we have so many thousands of millions. The kind of joking attitude is put, kind of self-mockery, simply because so many expressions of one divinity is there. If God created the entire universe with trillions and trillions and trillions of forms and galaxies, can he not create the same amount for himself? And all forms are deemed to be him, that one. So all these deities are there, but that's the unfortunate English translation. Because it goes akashaha ha vai ayashaha devaha. Space is this devaha, illuminating factor, this shining one. That should be the translation. And so all of these elements are there, starting from this primordial thing and going also to Vayu, air. Now today, of course, is Hanuman Jayanti, and Hanuman, as we know, Anjaneya, was Maruti, was the son of Maruti, the wind, or the son of Vayu, the air. Very subtle component, because that air we find everywhere, and we find tremendous strength in it. We find the strength expressed in the midst of storms. Maruti originally, of course, also identified with storms. You're part of the Rudras. So what are these storms? These are these deities, these devas, these revealing factors that can appear in a subtle form and experienced by us at the human level as tremendous hurricanes and upheavals, typhoons that can uproot houses, great power. And yet without it, we cannot breathe. Without this air, without moving, wind is something, is air that moves, that's all. Then breath is not possible. And this breath, this life force, essentially, this is the thing that sustains our life. It is not the air or the breath itself, it's the thing that's mobilizing the lungs in order to bring the air in and push out, make an exchange of carbon dioxide to the outside. The waste product from plants is oxygen. Very kindly, very nicely, gives us a free gift. In exchange, we give carbon dioxide back. And so it works in a beautiful symmetry and synergy. So what is this in terms of pranic understanding? Well, Akasha is this potential energy. Vayu is this, or air, as it's translated, is this kinetic energy. You swing a pendulum, it starts off with gravitational energy and goes up to kinetic energy and restores to gravitational energy. Not defining what it is, we know what it does. And then when you do it quickly, you generate radiation, heat. And the only thing that makes something hot, the only thing that makes something heavy is energy. When you wind a clock up versus one which is not wound up, the wound up clock is heavier. You put work into it. It doesn't look like that, but that's how it is. And when you take that wound up clock and you put it in acid, then the one that fizzes and burns, the one that has a higher temperature, is the one that you wound up. And when you put it higher and higher and on a higher shelf, it becomes heavier. Energy is the only thing that makes something heavy. So all this energy is being expressed in this different way as radiation, for example, and then as magnetism or as electrical energy and magnetism. That is the earth. The only thing the ancients left out was weak and strong nuclear forces, but by themselves there will be variations of this electrical and magnetic energy. And modern science, some century ago and odd, wanted to put this into one section, and they called it electromagnetism. That's all that they did, just variations of the same thing. But all of them are variations of the same thing, namely this thing called energy, prana. And then all the organs that catch it, speech, mind, eye, ear, exhibiting their glory, they say, unquestionably, it is we who held this body together by not allowing it to disintegrate. What is life is a good question. It's a question that is eternally answered. It is a series of lectures given by the great philosopher, scientist Schrödinger. And he's a philosopher because he asked some poignant questions about quantum mechanics. He doesn't think that the ordinary interpretation of how things can be a wave and a particle at the same time and held in a superposition, in an indeterminate position, until we deal with it, or until we become aware of it, or until something disrupts it and materializes it. And that paradox is called Schrödinger's cat. Now, he happened to be in Dublin, and he happened to give a series of lectures. What is life? That is all condensed in a book. What is life? Question mark. He saw as one of the great, great questions that we should be considering. And so this question is there. Now we put into a story form. You would personalize them. Once they all say, we are the best, we are the greatest. So they speak like that. And this question here, this beautiful word, vidhara yamaha, the thing that holds things together. What is that that holds things together? Unquestionably, something holds it together. So anyway, to them, the chief among them, who do you think that was? Prana, energy, said, don't be deluded. It is I who do not allow it to disintegrate by sustaining it, by dividing myself fourfold. And they remained credulous. Isognis tapatyas esha surya. As fire he burns, he is the sun, not only in this. So do not cherish this delusion, I alone, dividing myself fivefold, sustain and support this body. Its five forms are forms of breath. That is seen as an upward movement. Prana, apana, udhyana, samana, Vyana, these are the five expressions, going upwards, going downwards, regulating the upward movement, the upper part of the body, the lungs and so on, regulating the downward movement to do with digestion, and the lower part of the body, elimination, etc. That which is regulating that manufacturing or assimilating portion is called samana, equalizing everywhere, and vyana, radiating throughout the entire body. This prana is divided, as it were, in these sections. But it's only one energy, divided, seemingly divided this way. And if that leaves, everything else leaves. And in this story that is quoted in the Prasna Upanishad, these elements don't believe him. And so he appeared to be rising up from the body out of indignation. As he ascended, all the others too ascended immediately, and when he remained quiet, all others too remained in position. Just as in the world, all the bees are taken by the queen bee. When the queen bee flies off, all the other bees go with it. In accordance, as the monarch of the bees takes two wings and they settle down, as that monarch settles down, so similarly, all these faculties of speech and mind and eye and ear, etc., they behave in this way. They becoming delighted, they begin then to praise prana. Prana is the chief amongst all of these things. And they praise in this way, Prachapati Charasi Garbhe Tam Eva Pratijayase, as the Lord of creatures, thou movest in the womb. It is thyself that are born again, O life creatures. Here bring offering to thee who dwellest within the vital breaths. Again, Devanam Asi Vahni Tamaha Pitranam Pratama Sutha, thou art the chief bearer of offerings to all the deities in the cosmos now. Thou art the first offering to the fathers, the Pitras. Thou art the true practice of the seers, the rishis. Thou art the descendants of these great, great rishis known to us, such as Atharvan and Angiras. What is the Atharva Veda comes from? And thou art the chief of all the gods, the chief of all the deities, the Lord of all these subsections, all these expressions of forces, all these illuminating factors, called Indra, chief of these deities. So thou art that, Indrastam prana, O life by thy valor. Rudra, you are the Lord of Rudra. Rudras, there are 11 Rudras in the body. And these 11 Rudras are the 5 organs of information, the 5 organs of action. And the breaths are taken into account automatically in the mind. 11 of them. So you're all of this, actually. Thou art ever pure, O life, the one seer, the eater, the real Lord of all. We are the givers of what is to be eaten. O all-pervading air, thou art our Father. Vratya, ever pure, you are ever pure, being the firstborn, having no one else to initiate you, you are the uninitiated. The meaning is that you are by nature pure. And so, energy, what is it? Pure, pure energy. Prathama jattad anyasya samskrituhu abhavad asamskritu vratyastam svabhavata eva shuddha itya abhi prayaha. This is Shankaracharya's statement given this, that being the firstborn, and so having no one else to initiate you, you are in fact the uninitiated. And then it goes on. Yate tanur vachi, that form of thine which is well established in the speech or in the ear and the eye, which exists continuously in the mind, make that auspicious. Do not get away from us. Shivam, auspicious. Shivam is, Shiva is a term, an adjective later applied to as a noun, the auspicious one. So all of this is under the control of life, which is well established not only here, but the three worlds. Now, this is a typical way of the Upanishads dealing with things. Identifying something here, escalating it to the entire cosmos, extrapolating what we have here to apply to the entire creation as such. So three worlds are mentioned. Bhubhuva, Swaha, that's how we begin. This particular realm of ours, local to us. And then that which we speculate is way beyond anything that we can observe. And then in between, we find the interstitial spaces which are there, the voids that we call space itself. And then continue the prayer. Protect us as a mother, her sons. Grant to us prosperity and wisdom. Then, of course, the next question then would be the life then of a person. And so the next question will come like this. How does this life, from where is this life born, meaning human life? And how does it come into this body? And how does it distribute itself and establish itself? And in what way does it depart? You think it's one question. It's all related sub-questions to do with this one thing. And how does it support what is external? And how does it support what relates to the self? Excuse me. Now we come into the highly philosophical questions. Don't forget, this is related to the same Veda that has produced this Mandukya Upanishad that deals with three phases of consciousness, three worlds taking place that has already been mentioned. I mentioned them in the context of the cosmos, but whatever is here is extrapolated there, and whatever is there applies here. Three stages of consciousness are there. We all know them. And so far we have been talking only of the waking state, because all of these senses are applied to the waking state as we know it, but they're also applied to a state of dream. Because all of these indriyas, followers of Indra, these senses, all have their world and their play when we go to sleep and a dream is emanating from us. And the dream and the dreamer are really the same thing. Now we also know this in this waking world, that the perceiver and the perceived are also the same thing. Again, we know this from science, going back to 1905 again, that the sum total separation between two events, emission and absorption, actually comes out in an equation that takes three dimensions of space, summarized as an x, meaning space, you square it, and minus time. That means the total time separation between two events is nothing, is zero. It is only one thing standing there, the perceiver. But we don't see it like that. We don't register it like that. And the same thing in the dream, we also don't register it like that as well. So now we're getting into some deeper things. Already it was deep and inspirational that all of this energy is there. But where does this energy come from? Where can we trace it to? That's a very important question. And so these various questions arise like that. So the third question comes. We get to it. So Kaushalya, son of Ashvala, he asks the teacher, Pipalada, "O Venerable Sir, from where is this prana born? How does it come into this body?" All right. So it begins with ataha, next, or what comes next. To him, what is the answer? He said. Since it's a profound question, let me put you off. This is a very awkward question. You're putting supernormal questions. Be prepared. And building up a suspense in the student now. You're preeminently a knower Brahman. For that reason, you can ask the question and I can answer it to the best of my ability because you're on the sincere path of inquiry. And I mentioned in one place in the Saturday morning sessions when talking about the Upanishads, that these Upanishads have a prerequisite. We are studying this, but I'm assuming that those who are listening are prepared to listen. That is, in character, that they are pure enough to take this and absorb it deeply as a way of leading themselves in a meditative way to the truth and reality, not just using it as an abstract system of intellectualizing things. These are not to do with principles, but without the principles, basic principles, the practice doesn't happen either. And so what we have discussed so far is all worthy of meditation. Anyway, he's prepared to answer the question, and the answer is direct like this. From the self is born this prana. From this self, that is, from Atmana, from the Atman, Atmanaha, from this Atman, this immortal self, taught elsewhere in such texts as the Mandukya Upanishad and the Mundaka Upanishad. This self is the source of this energy. Now, this is a position that modern science hasn't gotten to. Because when asking, what is this energy, and trying to describe it, is equivalent to asking, what is the source of it? And here is the answer. It comes from one entity, Atman. And we know the characteristics of this, also termed Purusha. It is immutable, it's unchangeable. It doesn't transform itself into anything. It doesn't move, it doesn't change. It is Jayati, it is truth. It is, and it is Jayati, it is born, as it were. This prana is born from it, in other words. It has been spoken of previously by these other Upanishads that is mentioned. And it is in this world like a shadow, as an effect. When a person is possessed of such faculties as hands and legs and things like that, and so on and so forth, there is a cause to it. We have to investigate what is the cause to it. We don't accept it as simply there. And so in this similar way, we can examine that this Atman that is equivalent to Brahman, this truth, this Atatam is spread, as it were. As it is the king alone who employs the officers, saying, rule over these villages and those ones, just so prana, that is the very expression of this self that doesn't move, this engages all the other organs separately. And then how does he distribute them in this local village called human body? He places apana in the two lower apertures, prana himself issuing out of the mouth and nostrils, residing in the eyes and the ears, and in the middle, however, is samana. For this one distributes equally all this food that is eaten, governing digestion. And from that issue out what can be viewed as 7 flames, that is 7 apparent divisions. Now this self, though, that is the subtle body, is surely in the heart. Now we come to a meditative aspect of it. And we can view something that is commonly understood. We can think of it as having 101 chief nerves emanating from it, You can visualize it something like the sun standing within, beaming different rays. We can visualize it in this way. And in this way, it's transferring all the energy to the body and doing it in 5 different ways. And each of these has another 100 divisions, and each branch is divided into 72,000 sub-branches, many, many branches. And among them moves this dhyana, that is this total energy which is there, that emanates throughout the entire nervous system and flows through as a wave system throughout the entire body. So there's an imagery that has been brought out in this. The digestive power in the stomach, we can see as a kind of sacrificial fire that is there. And the food, we can see as the offering or the oblation. And the sense knowledge, we can see as the flame. And the 7 organs that are mentioned is the head, the 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, and the mouth. And these derive their capacity to act from the energy supplied by food. So all of these deities that were mentioned, 7 of them being in the head, we can imagine them in this way. Then, of course, there is Udana, and when it is in its upward trend, it leads to a virtuous world as a result of virtue. Already we had discussed when this prana leaves, although not in that action, or not in that sense, we were told that 2 avenues are open to us. And this has been described in Upanishad as Shreyas and Prayas. Or Prayas and Shreyas, this is the preferable path and the pleasurable path. We have these options. And we can, one leads in one direction, the other one leads in another direction. But this Udana is the royal entrance. It is the movement upward. And actually, when yogis leave the body, as it were, that is the royal entrance that is used for departure. Entry and departure is there. And we can now look at this 11-gated city mentioned in the Upanishad. This, Ekadasha Dharam, this 11-gated city that is there with 7 gates in the head and then 1 in the navel, organs of procreation, evacuation, and the royal entrance is there also in the navel as well. So this Udana. Now then, how do we extrapolate this? What happens here happens everywhere. Adityaha, vai. The sun is indeed the external prana. It rises up, favoring this prana in the eye. That deity that is in the earth favors by attracting a prana in the human being. And the space that is the air that is within is the samana. And the common air is dhyana. And then having delineated that, the line of progeny is also seen of any man of knowledge who knows prana, thus sustains no break, himself becomes immortal pertaining to this. There is this one mantra that is there, and the mantra is having known the origin, the coming lodgment and 5-fold overlordship and the physical existence of prana, we can achieve immortality, is the mantra. This is on the basis that whatever we think of, whatever we meditate on, comes to us. If we understand a subject, we have gotten mastery of the subject. That means all the benefits flow of that understanding flow to us. And so the vitality that is produced in the procreation of creatures, that happens when we have mastered this prana. But he becomes immortal. Immortality is the goal here. And so this immortality comes with that last great mantra that is issued. This idea of this self being lodged in the heart, the Jivatman, also called the Lingatman, is mentioned in several places. Chandogya Upanishad mentions it, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad mentions it. So there is a precedent for all of these statements. There is a coordination of these ideas that is to be found, dotted around in all of these Upanishads. Utpatim, ayatim stanam, vibhutvam chaiva panchaja, adyatman chaiva pranasya, vijñāya mritam ashnuti. Vidyayamritam ashnuti iti. The birth, the entrance, the abode, the fivefold overlordship and the relation to self of the life. Knowing these, one obtains immortality. Knowing these, one obtains immortality, is repeated. So any one of us, any one of you who knows the secret, the birth of life, its entrance into the body, how it abides there in its fivefold division, as udhana, as apana, as prana, as samana, as vyana, and knows its relationship to the inner spirit. That's the important thing. Naturally enjoys eternal life because you have discovered everything from there. Just through this avenue. You can use this as a wonderful meditation. Very often people ask me, how should we meditate? What should we meditate on? All these Upanishads have a wealth of subjects for meditation, leading us in to this one entity, this Atman that sits within. Now we won't have time necessarily for the next question, and maybe next week what we'll do, we'll deal more briefly with the other questions which are there, from 4 to 6. But just to introduce you to the subject matter, because each one is a progression inward. Anyway, the next question really comes from Gargya. Gargya is the grandson of Surya, and he asked his teacher Pippalada, he asks him, what are they that sleep in this person? What are they that keep awake in him? What is the God that sees the dreams? And whose is this happiness? In whom, pray, are all these established? That is, having dealt now with this physical body, we now go on to the next stages of consciousness. And there's no question about the answer. There's no hesitation, I should say, about the answer, because this question is there. And so I'll read you, what is this answer? As all the rays of the setting sun become one in the circle of light, the beautiful, beautiful image, and as they spread forth when he rises again and again, even so does all this become one in the Supreme God, the mind. Therefore, in that state, the person hears not, sees not, smells not, tastes not, and touches not, speaks not, takes not, rejoices not, emits not, and moves not. And there are a number of wonderful parallel passages to this. A question is asked to the Yajnavalkya from Janaka. Where does a person go when a person has completed their work and their walk? And what is the light of man by which he does his activities? And of course, the answer is again progressive. By the light of the sun, naturally. Well, yes, that's an obvious thing. Yes, okay. Light of the sun. Next question, ask again. When you're not satisfied with the question and you want a deeper answer, you simply ask the question again. Oh, by the light of the moon. When the sun is gone, then what? By the light of the moon. If the moon is gone, then by what? By the light of the stars. When that's all gone and it's a black night, then by what? Eventually it comes to by the light of the fire. If the fire has gone out and so on, then what? See, a kind of teasing answer, progressive answer taking place. He says, see, it's by the light of the self. But which self? see when all the senses have set. So it's like when the sun is setting, then what? When the eyes go down, same thing. When all these sense organs retreat, as it were, then what happens? As a very profound concept, and leads us to the idea that the self is staying and remains, even in the midst of dream, in the midst of sleep also. And again, it comes down then to a question related to this prana. So the question is asked in relation to dream and sleep and bliss and dreamless sleep also, and then concludes with that, and then question 5 is answered. And then ultimately question 5 is related to what is this Om, because we've just discussed 3 states of consciousness, and we know in the Mandukya Upanishad that 3 states of consciousness are related to the sound symbol and its 3 components of Om. And so the next question will be concerning Om. And then finally, can we see that the whole cosmos is something like a cosmic person? And can we see that in us we have these various components, 16 in all? So these questions are asked and answered. And next week I'll do it a little bit more briefly so that we get the core of the understanding. A deeper study you can do yourself. We finish off with that. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.